Kathy Andel. I was in the Army for 10 years. I ended up being a Specialist 6th, so Spec 6. Well, that's, as you go up the ranks, you start as just a private, then you move up. This is like an E6, an E6, which would be a staff sergeant. Because of my MOS, which is the field I was in, was LPN, and I was already an LPN before I went in the Army. I served during Vietnam, but I did not go to Vietnam because at that time they weren't taking women in my MOS. They were taking men because they could go into combat, because at that time women were trained in non-combat. They were taking women in like finance and those different related fields that could stay behind what they called the front line, but at that time the Women's Army Corps was what I was in, and it didn't change over to the regular Army till in the mid-70s, where everybody was, and then still women weren't supposed to be in combat, but now everything has changed, of course. Well, I started out in basic in Alabama, and when I went there, I left Calumet, where I'm from, and it was winter, of course, it was February, and we got down to Alabama, and for me it was hot, but there were so many of the girls from the south that didn't think it was hot, so if one wore a sweater or the coat, we all wore a sweater or the coat, and there were times that being used to the cold, and I was boiling hot. So then I had basic training in Fort McClellan, Alabama. And then I went to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas for what they call AIT, it's where you go into your field. And even though I was an LPN, I had to learn the Army's way, the medic way of doing things. And then from there, I was stationed in Fort Gordon, Georgia for 2.5 years. And then I re-enlisted for Fort Ord, California, where I wanted to go. It was on my bucket list since I was a little kid, because I was born in Monterey, where Fort Ord is, when my dad was out in the Army there. And I always wanted to go back, because I was just a baby when we moved up to Calumet. And I always said, oh, I'm gonna go out there, I'm gonna go out there. Well, back in the day when I was at first in LPN in the 60s, I was making $11 a day. And there's no way that I was gonna save any money to get there. But I re-enlisted for Fort Ord, and I did get out there, and it was absolutely beautiful, and if I had my way, I'd be living there now. So I was there for 15 months, and all my friends were getting orders for Germany, and then the ramp sergeant came one day into where I was working in the clinic, and he came in and singing that na 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 na, hey hey goodbye, and I'm like, who? And he said, you. And I said, where? And he said, Germany. And I said, when? He said, I don't know, but just you have to, because it was Memorial Day weekend, it was on that Friday. So he said, go up on Tuesday after the holiday and find out. So he said, you leave on the 13th. I said, the 13th of what? He said, June. So then from there I went to Germany, and I was there for 5.5 years. When I first found out that I was going to Germany, my mother said, oh, it's not going to be an adventure, because my mother's family all came from Germany. And so then just before I got on the plane to leave, my mother said, I hope you find a nice German and get married. So a year later, I was married to a German. And then he was in the German Army at the time. I was in the 31st Combat Support Hospital, because we were the first women that were put into all-male units at that time, because that was just when they switched over from WACs and to the regular Army. And they didn't know what to do with us. They had no place really for us to stay. And at that time women weren't issued fatigues, so we had to get, everything we had was male. We had to wear men's fatigues, men's boots, and men's everything. Some were very receptive and willing to teach us and show us, and some just were, they didn't care one way or the other, but there was a lot of harassment going on, and a lot of people said, oh, women don't belong here, and but we got through it. But when I was in Germany, besides the 31st Combat Support Hospital, then when I went to Gießen, I was in a dispensary where it was like a doctor's office kind of thing, and we treated everybody, and if we couldn't treat them, or if they were really sick, then we transferred them down to Frankfurt. And at that, we did many jobs there, because I worked in the clinic itself. I worked in the well baby clinic, because we had civilians and the dependents that we took care of, and one of the pediatrician that was stationed with us, he wanted me to be his nurse. He actually wanted wanted me to go on to PA school. That yeah, he thought that he was ready to sponsor me for PA school, but you know, that's when I was married and he was still in the army, so the German army. So I didn't pursue that. And then at my end of my career there in Germany, I worked in what was called nuclear surety records. I was responsible for all the records of anybody that was working around the nuclear weapons up in the northern Germany. And I had to review all their records and make sure that there was nothing in them that would be that they couldn't work around the nuclear weapons if they had any past drug abuse or you know any kind of mental anything. And so then if I found any of that, I'd have to refer them then to our chief, and he'd go through and review and talk to them, and some got passed through and some got assigned to different units because they weren't capable of working around the nuclear weapons. And then so then I extended for another time because he still was in the German army. When he got out, then I was able to go back, and I went back to San Antonio. They sent us to San Antonio to the 41st Combat Support Hospital, because at that time they said if you know how to operate the field hospitals, you were more likely to be stationed in a field hospital for the rest of your career. Well, when I got there, I was pregnant with my son, and they gave me all kinds of grief about being pregnant and staying in, where I had my daughter in Germany and they didn't give me any hassle at all. And I had her, I had maternity leave and everything, but then when I got to San Antonio, they just gave me such grief about staying in, and so at that time then I decided to get out. But I did use my GI Bill to go back to school for radiography. All my years in the Army, I traveled all over, and I was in Germany. I mean, we did a lot of traveling. We went to Amsterdam and Salzburg, Austria, and Rome. I've been to Rome twice, and Paris, and I've traveled all over and down to the Oktoberfest twice in Germany. I've been to places a lot of people just dream of going. So I've been very fortunate in my life, and now I get my care through the VA, and with all my health issues, I'm very fortunate with that, and they give me excellent care. When I first got out of the Army and I wanted to join the American Legion up in Calumet, I was trying to find out when meetings were, and I kept finding, people kept telling me all different stuff. So then one day I went down to the American Legion club room there, and I said, so when's the next meeting? So the guy says to me, oh, you should join the auxiliary. And I said, no. I said, I'm a veteran. I said, I'm eligible to go on to the Legion. They told me a day, so I went there, and it was closed. So I got such a runaround that finally I called the guy who was the president of the American Legion, and I said, if you don't let me join, I said, I will take this to Washington if I have to. And then all of a sudden, people were coming to my door saying, oh, here's an application, So I joined. The first meeting I went to, some old guy turned around and said to me, since when did they let women in here? And this was in 1980. And so I would go to meetings and I would volunteer for different things, and they would, oh no, we got enough, but then they were still asking for volunteers. They wouldn't let me volunteer for anything or do anything. When you go to the VA and you're sitting in the waiting room, since COVID there's not so much, because they don't usually let other people in, but guys will say to me, oh, so is your husband seeing somebody? They think that I'm there as a wife of a veteran. They'll ask you that, and they overlook you as a woman, that you're also a veteran. And then when you say, oh, I'm the veteran, then then it's a whole different thing. But
right.
we do get overlooked as women veterans. So we started working in St. Vinny's in the food pantry when my daughter was in her confirmation class, and this was in the early 90s. And so we'd work there once a month on a Thursday evening, because they stay open on a Thursday evening to help the people that can't get there during the day. So we started that, and then we just kept doing it. And then my son was in confirmation, so we just kept doing it again, and we've been doing it ever since. I'm very involved with Northern, with the football team, because my son, when he started out at Northern, he started out as a student equipment manager with the football team. And I became very involved, and I would bake for the guys. I'd bake cookies and make meals for some of them. And then I started, now I still, every year we go down to an orchard down in Central Lake, King Orchard. We go there and I get apples and bring apples back for the football team and for our band at Northern, because I just love our band. And then I also bring apples around to the VA clinic here. I call it Apple Patrol, and I bring it around to people that just have been good to me and have made me happy. It's changed so much, you know, from back when I went in the Women's Army Corps to now. I know I've talked to the sergeant who's in charge of the ROTC at Northern, and we've talked a lot about the differences, and he had mentioned one time that he would like me to come and even talk to the people under his command, because you know they understand the now and how it is, but not how it used to be that they got to where we are now in the military. You know, people think, you know, that I should just be a quiet little old lady, but when I start voicing my opinion, they're like, oh.